See. Okay. So we are live. I'm Craig LeBlanc, the DoorMan, your host with LTP TV, Low Time Preference TV. I was scrolling through my Twitter feed and I was looking. I had just finished interviewing another doctor that was speaking about sun exposure and stuff, and I ran across Dr. Jack and started reading his profile, especially his pinned post. You should definitely look into that. If you go into his profile, he's got like 23 points that does a really good job of explaining the benefits of sun exposure with a lot of it looks like science and data that back it up. So I asked him if he wanted to come onto the show and maybe elaborate more, because I think this is something we need to get out to the community and to the listeners. So welcome to the show, Dr. Jack. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you.
Maybe if we can just go back and say kind of where you came from, your history, even back to your childhood. I always like for people to understand the upbringings of people before, to give them a little context, and maybe they can identify with your background and see a similar journey for themselves.
Well, my ancestry is from Northern Europe, around the 59th latitude. My family came over in the immigration wave between 1870 and 1910 through Ellis Island. My grandmother and grandfather on both sides settled in New York City. One settled in Yorkville of Manhattan, which at the time was filled with Irish and German immigrants. And then the other one settled in Queens. What happened after that? No one in my family had ever been through college. I was the first one that went through. I came from a very poor family in New York. So the first, I guess, time that I was orange pilled was actually by some very wealthy people that my father used to work for. And the lessons I got taught, it's really interesting to be very poor in the richest city in the world. Why? Because you get a very interesting perspective about how the world works. And basically from my interaction between my own family and the people that I was exposed to in New York, I realized that if I listened to my family, I would wind up having the same outcomes they did. And if I sat down and opened my ears and shut my mouth and listened to the rich people, how it was they became rich in the United States, since we're all immigrants to begin with. And what I began to realize at that time, because this is before I actually went to college, that I needed to understand kind of how money worked. And at that time, I was very interested and pushed to actually go work on Wall Street with Goldman Sachs. The person who introduced me to money was a guy tied to a banking cartel, Sterling National Bank, the CEO. Him and his wife kind of taught me everything that I needed to know about money, banking, fractional reserve banking, how it works, what the history was. And what
How old were you when you learned all this?
This is probably 13 through 15, because I started college. I started college when I was 15 and a half and graduated at 19.
Wow.
And when I came out, the mistake probably that I made, I decided after getting schooled by the Silberts in New York that I didn't want to be a banker. I actually walked in his shoes for 3 years. He had me work for him in the city. And I said, this isn't really for me. I do want to be wealthy, but I don't want to do it this way. And instead I chose the path of playing either professional sports or becoming a doctor. And then my mother further distilled that in me by bribing me with a car to stay home and pushing me to be a doctor, because at that time, no professional athletes were making big money. At the time, I think Dave Winfield was making $1 million a year for the Yankees. That was the top echelon, when all the doctors that lived in Mr. Silbert's building were making millions of dollars a year, on Fifth Avenue and Park Avenue. Mm-hmm. So I wound up going the medical route, lost a lot of connections with the things that I grew up with in New York. But as I told you before we started to record, it becomes very, very interesting when you realize growing up as a poor kid in the richest country of the world and the richest city in the world, you get a very interesting perspective. It actually keeps your mind open. So when I went through medicine, I was very, very good about what I did. I was very efficient as well. I finished, I skipped 2 grades in school. I finished college very early. That allowed me to move to the next part of my life, which was becoming a dentist. When I became a dentist, I was at the top of my class and then finished that a year early, which blew people away. And then I went down and gave a year to LSU to become an oral surgeon. And when I was down there for a year, I got introduced to the neurosurgeons. And long story short, I shaved a lot of time off of the dental training, and then I was offered the opportunity to become a neurosurgeon. And
you came to LSU, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. You talking about?
Well, not Baton Rouge. It was actually in New Orleans. The two medical schools in Louisiana are in New Orleans and Shreveport.
Right. Well, that's where I'm from, so I know that area well. I'm in New Orleans.
LSU undergrad is at Baton Rouge, but LSU and Baton Rouge has nothing but the college. The professional schools are elsewhere in the state. So once that happened, I trained at Charity Hospital. And again, this was another juxtaposition to take a Yankee in the Deep South and put me in even a poorer area than, what I was used to in New York, growing up as a poor kid in New York. So I got another perspective that actually helped me, mixing this all together with the things I had learned from the bankers who trained me. And when I came out of my residency, I realized probably I would say within 3 or 4 years that everything I was taught, I had to have an open mind about, because many of the people that I performed it on weren't getting better. And that kind of told me that many of the things I was taught were probably false truths. In Bitcoin parlance, this was, fiat shitcoin stories were actually buried in the base of medicine. Now, this is before, Bitcoin was out there. And I think this is the reason why my story is a little bit different than most people. Mm-hmm. I was decentralized before Bitcoin was ever thought of. And I was decentralized because I realized that nature was fundamental in human thriving, survival, and doing well. And I also realized very, very early on from the lessons I learned from the Wall Street banker that time was our most valuable asset. It wasn't money. He actually instilled that in me early. He said, when you have to make a decision between time and money, you should always err on the time side, not the money side. And I always thought that was a very unique perspective from a guy who's a multi-millionaire. We're not talking a little money. He lived in a penthouse on 75th and 5th, in New York, which is, right now to buy that apartment is probably $200-300 million. So this is in the mid, I'd say early 80s, mid 80s. And when I finished residency around 2005, I had this kind of come to Jesus moment when I had my own health issue. And I realized that if I used the prescription that centralized medicine was teaching all the doctors, that it didn't get me better. So what did I do? I gave crazy a chance. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the decentralized networks in nature to see if I can get myself better. And lo and behold, even when I didn't believe it in the beginning, when I used light, water, and magnetism, specifically light and temperature, to control my circadian biology, the things that broke down in me when I was a resident for 13 years, getting, a dental degree and a medical degree and neurosurgery training, actually helped me tremendously and actually started to make me a better doctor, better neurosurgeon. My patients started to have better outcomes. It got so popular where I was practicing in Nashville that I was asked to do a TED Talk. And I knew the people that asked me to do the TED Talk were going to be put in a bind because what I was going to tell them went against the people who sponsored their event, which was Big Pharma. And I said, you realize that the information I'm going to deliver here is going to be pretty harmful. to who's sponsoring your event, and they didn't care, which told me they were good people.
Mhm.
But I did do that event, and immediately it was censored. That was a good thing for me because it turns out when someone tries to censor you, people get a lot more interested in what you're doing. And then several of the doctors that I worked with in the hospital at in Nashville asked me to start to put my information online. The reason why is the information was so disruptive that it would never be published in peer review literature. Why? Because remember, peer review literature has an oracle problem, just like we learn about in Bitcoin. The oracle problem is the editors. The editors control the flow of information. And what the goal in centralized medicine is to make sure that you continue to follow the party line and use drugs. It's going through the drive-through. You have an ear infection, give me antibiotics. You have your sore throat, give me antibiotics. Just give me a prescription so I can go back and do the shit that I do every day of my life. And I'm not going to ask too many questions. And that's how the system is really built. The same thing is true at surgery. So when I gave the talk and I started to put my information on the internet, it got, how shall I say, shocking to me how popular I became. And several communities I started to drop this information in. The first one was probably the paleo community, which, was, I would say, the forerunner of the modern carnivore diet. And I thought, well, these people are evolutionary directed. They seem to understand evolution. So this could be a good place to drop this message that light trumps food, and to teach them why that happens. And it turns out that was actually a pretty naive idea. Why? Because it turned out, even though my message was inconvenient to centralized medicine, it was even more devastating to the paleo community. Why? Because it pointed out that many of them were charlatans, just like centralized medicine were, because they were pushing diet and exercise as the top level issue for health when it wasn't. It was circadian biology. And I try to explain to them very, very clearly, as I'm doing to you right now, that nature is based on no single controller. It's light and dark. And you have to have both of them in order to make everything work. And when I pointed out to them very inconveniently that all food comes from photosynthetic webs, and that means it's really a light story at its core, that's when, they actively try to go after me. And it got so bad that one of their leaders, not that he was involved with it, but he knew people, they set up a fake Twitter account and actually had me thrown off a cruise ship from fake tweets because they said I was bringing a bioweapon on the cruise ship. And this is before, censorship in medicine was really a big deal. We're talking now like 2010. Okay. So this is 15 years ago. So when, you see the stuff that you've dealt with, in the last 4 years with COVID about doctors being censored. I mean, dude, I'm old hat at this. I've had a lot of experience with this. So what I went through COVID was no big deal. I was much better prepared the second time around when they tried to cancel me. And when I posted all this stuff and I kept going, like, the more they tried to hinder me, the more I pushed. They try to get the centralized entities, hospital systems, state medical boards. I even had the FBI, the CIA, DARPA, all these people contact me. Even one time I had NASA involved in some of the stuff that I was doing. And it was a very interesting walk through, centralized versus decentralized networks, and how dangerous this could be for a paradigm. And it always reminded me of what Voltaire said. It's very, very dangerous to be telling the truth when you're inside a paradigm that's built on, a house of cards. So now we fast forward to 2020, and I was making my mark. By that time, I was very, very well known in decentralized medicine and on the internet, but I had not really spoken up loudly to my own tribe about Bitcoin. And I said, guys, you already learned that decentralized medicine is totally based on the other genome in the body, which is the mitochondrial DNA. I said, now I need to introduce you to the artificial one that Satoshi Nakamoto invented, because the idea there is a lot the same as it is with health. And what it comes down to is Bitcoin really is a time machine, just like your mitochondria are. And if you can put your value in that time machine, you can take it across space-time domains and it will grow with you. It's actually like having a second job, and it will allow you to be cancel proof, because even if they try to take your job from you, it'll be an issue. Now, the irony was I was turned on to Bitcoin at the beginning because I have several friends that are true OGs. You probably know some of those guys like Jack Dorsey. And Jack was following my work on the health side because he was having health problems from being a tech abuser. And that's when I first became aware of it. And I thought it was total bullshit for the first probably 3 to 4 years. And I didn't join the class of Bitcoin until 2013, and do I still feel bad about, that decision, even today? The answer is yes. But I always say that we get, Bitcoin at the price we deserve. And the price we deserve often comes from the way we think about things. And it was ironic to me when I really looked at the white paper. The thing that struck me about the white paper more than anything else was the bibliography. It had 8 things in it, and 3 of them related to timestamping. And immediately I thought right away, did this guy Satoshi Nakamoto have any idea about physics? Because timing is the key to this whole thing. And then I thought about, it's so interesting that he's using a DC electric current to create value. And I said, this is the same thing a cell does. It turns sunlight into a DC electric current in our body. And then I kept parsing it out. And that's when I made my first decision, said I need to get involved in this. I may not understand it as well as I need to. I said, but this makes too much sense to me, and it has too much links to the things that I'm teaching people on the health side. So that's when I jumped in. And that's kind of how I became a Bitcoiner. It's from a thermodynamic understanding. And now we are 11 years after, that effect. And now I'm being invited to, Bitcoin Prague by a couple of young kids to show people what the true value of Bitcoin is. And I did that by using 3 technologists. I used a software guy, a hardware guy, and then a Bitcoin guy. All 3 of whom were very, very wealthy, who all succumbed to tech abuse, who had a ton of either fiat or Bitcoin. And ultimately, I said to the audience, I said, these people, as far as I'm concerned, were ultimate failures. What good is it to be very, very wealthy if you don't have the time in which to spend that money or spend it with the people you love with? And it's a very counterintuitive point, I think, for Bitcoiners to hear. But since most Bitcoiners are probably below the age of 45, I think it's a very good opportunity to explain to them, because here I am, a boomer, because millennials tend to think that boomers don't get Bitcoin. That's certainly not true in my circle of friends. Many of the boomers actually understand it better than millennials do. And the reason why is we've been fucked, by the banking system longer than you guys have. And we also, I understood it because I was canceled. And by virtue of trying to cancel me 15 years ago, this affected, my ability to practice medicine, made me very unpopular in centralized medicine. But it didn't matter, because my Bitcoin actually made me more money than I could make as a neurosurgeon through this whole process. So what did I do? I chuckled at the attempt at blocking me. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to become a spokesperson, for this way of life, never realizing that I would actually ever talk about Bitcoin and how it relates to this story. And the person that really pushed me to do that was actually Dorsey in 2020, when he came to meet a group of my members. And I said to him, I said, Jack, what do you need me to do, to help you out? He goes, it's very simple. He goes, I need you to teach people to decentralize everything in their life. It starts with how they think. He goes, I don't think there's anybody better than you that can teach people about the science behind it, but also how Bitcoin really works. He goes, you understand it extremely well. He goes, so just do what you did in medicine and do it for Bitcoin. And I thought to myself, that's not a big ask. It really isn't. All he's asking me to do is to talk about my opinions, talk about my experience. And kind of that's what happened. And then through COVID, something magically happened when they tried to cancel me again for my outspoken opinions on the jab and why you shouldn't take it. I wind up getting hooked up with Nicole Shanahan before, she was announced as Robert Kennedy's VP. And it's through some of the things that happened with Bobby Kennedy. And one of my other friends, who happens to also be friends with Jack Dorsey, who's a non-cancelable guy, is Rick Rubin, big music producer. And he invites me on a podcast to talk to Huberman about my work, about light, water, and magnetism. Why? Because he's hoping that Huberman will become the PhD inside the ivory tower to get people to realize that decentralized thinking in medicine really needs to happen. So this confluence kind of happens. And the next thing you know, I'm going to El Salvador in 2020, 2021, before Bitcoin is legal tender. And, I was on an app on the phone called Clubhouse with a bunch of young millennial Bitcoiners telling me that I was crazy to go down there. MS-13 was going to cut my arms off, steal my Bitcoin, and I said, no, I think many of the things that I learned from Theodore Silbert and the banking world at Sterling National Bank on 75th and Madison actually was coming out of the mouth of President Bukele at that time. And I said, I have a duty to myself to go down and find out, is this guy like a regular politician, or is he full of shit, or is something else going to happen? And I've been hearing things through my relationship with the guys at Twitter that a young kid in Chicago was doing some crazy shit down in El Salvador. So I decided to go visit and find out for myself. And literally 2 weeks later, Jack Mallers and Bukele come up with a constitutional amendment, to make Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. And I was staying in El Zante on the Pacific Ocean. In fact, another pretty famous podcaster in Bitcoin that you may know, Mike Peterson, him and Ramon Martinez were pretty crafty in getting the house that they currently live in away from my grasp, because I was going to buy that house. And I told the guys in Clubhouse, I said, I think what's happening in El Salvador right now is the same thing that happened in the United States in 1801 when Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon. And of course, you can imagine the millennials there thought I was batshit crazy. And I said, well, you just have to hear me out. I drove around the country for 2 weeks with my members. I had VIP members with me. And I said, the most remarkable thing is this guy's only been a president for 18 months, but everything is flipped. He's doing things to actually return freedom to them. And literally, I think it was about 2-3 months, that's when he decided to go after the gangs. But I thought it was very interesting that he made Bitcoin legal tender first before he, used the Constitution against the bad hombres. And, here we are now, 4 years later, he's been reelected. His plan has worked beautifully. The people in El Salvador are probably more happy than anybody in the United States. I can say that. I just came back from the Bitcoin conference. I spent some time at my beach house in Destin. And I also spent a week at my clinic in Louisiana. And after doing that, I hadn't been back in the States for about 14 months. And I'm going to tell you, moving to El Salvador 3.5-4 years ago, before anybody else got here. This was before Max, before Stacy. Probably the only person that's been here longer than me in the Bitcoin space is Mike Peterson and some of those guys. And I will tell you that I think this was the right decision for me. Why? Because it's brought the two worlds, the decentralized medicine and decentralized money together, so that I could have a conversation with a guy like you and tell you what's the genesis, like where did it go? And I think how it starts is, in my opinion, not the most important part of the story. I think the most important part of the story is how has this story evolved? Where we are now, and I don't know, Greg, if you know about the history, I was tapped on the shoulder about 18 months ago by Bukele to write a constitutional amendment for El Salvador for medical freedoms. And I wrote that amendment, gave it to the president. He needed to change some laws to get this law passed. Why? Because it's extremely restrictive. I'll tell you how restrictive it is. I was asked when I did the podcast with Rick Rubin and Bobby Kennedy on Tetragrammaton, would I be willing to share the law with Bobby Kennedy's team? And Bukele gave me the okay to do that. I sent it to Bobby Kennedy. I spoke to him on the phone and spoke to his healthcare attorney. And Bobby told me that not even Ron DeSantis could get this law passed in Florida. That's how tight the law was. And then he contacted Aaron Siri to call me up because Aaron wanted to help me rewrite the law so that it could be passed. And I'm like, Aaron, I don't think you understand. It's already been accepted by President Bukele to send to the legislative branch. This is going to happen in El Salvador. Wow. And he was kind of like, you got to be kidding me. And I'm like, no. I mean, and I got a call back from Bobby, though, 6 weeks after that. This was after I did the podcast. And he said, could we use some of the pages from the law in our platform? I said, yeah, go ahead, use it, knock yourself out. Right after that, that's when Bobby started talking about chronic diseases. He started talking about, non-native EMF, all the things, and captured regulatory stuff that is boilerplate for Bobby, as a healthcare attorney. And right around this time, how did his Bitcoin journey begin? One of the guys that was in the clubhouse room, American Hodl, asked me to ask Bobby, did he get turned on to Bitcoin from David Bailey? And the answer turned out to be no. Bobby didn't even know who Bailey was at that time. And Bobby told me directly, he goes, well, I got this big Monsanto, suit, and I decided to YOLO in most of my money into Bitcoin at that time. This is all at the same time he was learning. And the reason this story is important, Craig, to get out is it was very similar to my own story. I YOLO'd in at $98 a coin back then without really knowing truly what Bitcoin was. And Bobby's YOLOing in after he gets this Monsanto award. And he gets up to speed. And, he was just at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville and told the audience that, look, I'm now just like you. I'm a Bitcoin maxi, and most of my wealth now is in Bitcoin. Now, you may not agree with everything Bobby says, but I have to tell you that when I saw his introduction to Bitcoin, when I saw his introduction to medical freedoms, this really endeared him to me in a big way. Why? Because I don't trust politicians. And I try to tell you the story. I didn't trust Bukele when I came down here either. Mm-hmm. But the one thing I can tell you is that President Bukele and Bobby have very similar threads to him. They care about freedom. They care about freedom in money, and they care about freedom in medicine. Therefore, those guys, they get my trust, they get my vote until they break the trust or they break their promise. And I think the reason I support people like that, just like I agreed to come on your podcast, anybody who supports freedom in money and freedom in healthcare, we should champion. These are the people that ultimately are going to help us. And they're going to help us whether you believe the stuff that I teach about health or you believe the stuff that you talk about on your podcast about money, that ultimately what's the benefit to all of us that are listening to this now? It's that we get more time. And we get the time to spend with our family, to the people we care about, the people we love, and do the things that we want to do so that nobody can encumber us in our decision-making process and our choices. Our choices are free from tyranny, and we have personal sovereignty. So sorry this was a long rant, but that is the entire story about how I got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, and so I love how you put it. It's more of a time theft. I think a lot of times we present it as people are stealing your money, but how many times have we heard money is time? And so people are not, they're stealing something even more valuable than your money. They're
The most valuable asset we have.
That's right.
I mean, when you put it that way, I remember Robert Breedlove used to talk about, all the time he'd send tweets about inflation as taxation without, representation. I actually think that that's a docile way to describe inflation. I think time theft is the way. And, when you flip this around, I would ask a guy like Robert Breedlove. I actually had dinner with Michael Saylor in Prague. I actually told him straight to his face. I said, people will spend millions of dollars in my clinic if they have a GBM tumor and they're going to die in a year to get an extra 4 or 5 months. I said, that tells me as a doctor, the time is pretty valuable to people. They'll do extraordinary things when time is subtracted from them. So why am I delineating this story with you? Maybe we can talk to the people that don't have brain tumors or are actively dying at a faster rate so that they make better decisions while they're alive so they can thrive. See, that's really the story of decentralized medicine. It's a facade of Bitcoin that I don't think Bitcoiners see. I mean, I said on the stage at Prague, and I probably took some shit for it, but I look at Hal Finney as the ultimate failure in Bitcoin. Brilliant guy, talks to Satoshi, but through his abuse of technology, likely gets ALS and he dies. And all of us miss him. We all saw the pictures of him running marathons. Doesn't mean that all those things that centralized medicine told him were healthy for him, like eating a healthy diet and running in marathons, did it do any good for him? The answer is no. The same thing is true at Steve Jobs. Same thing is true at Paul Allen. So maybe the guys who aren't sick, the guys that are leaders in Bitcoin now, the guys who are leaders in politics like Bobby, maybe we can start asking better questions so that the people that do have lots of money, who are going to be able to save people down the road because they have a ton of Bitcoin, can start pulling people back into, the life raft and say, hey, look, guys, time is the most valuable asset. Let's all get on the same page. I mean, we don't have to like each other, but if you're decentralized and you're thinking about money or health, as far as I'm concerned, you're my target audience. If you are not, if you are centralized, you believe Dr. Fauci, you believe, in some of the things that Trump supported, like Operation Warp Speed, you're not my guy. And I make no bones about this when I tell you this, Greg. I have no issues with those people going by the wayside. Why? Because that's what evolution has taught us. That's why we have 5 extinction events. Nature cleans up her nasty mistakes very quickly, and she does it on her terms. And I think we're seeing that in Bitcoin terms, in terms of how fiat is dying throughout the world. I mean, just look what's happening in the U.S. Treasury market the last 4 years. All rich people, like the Theodore Silberts, who are now dead, if you ever thought in a million years that he would have saw the Treasury market do what it did the last 4 years, that's basically how his business was built. Rich people YOLOing their money into bonds and riding high interest rates all the way down for like 40 years. You basically, it was guaranteed return. That's no longer the case. And it's because money is failing, and it's failing in different zip codes at different rates. Here in El Salvador, it failed because of their first civil war. That's why they use U.S. money. But Bitcoin is now the insurance policy for when American money fails. And that's how Bukele thought about it. I just wonder when it's going to be like your audience, like the Americans that listen to this podcast who have, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank and don't realize that that money is now at risk way more than Bitcoin is. You now have, BlackRock, you now have custodians, of Wall Street, the Theodore Silberts of today, the Jamie Dimons, tell you it's rat poison, but yet they're all selling it to people in America. Why? Because they just heard Bobby and Trump in Nashville say, we need to make this a reserve asset so that we can maybe save our paper money. Why? Because this is an asset that's immutable. It's got tremendous value and scarcity. It has things about it that nothing else in history of man has ever presented itself.
Yeah,
that to me is a good idea, and maybe maybe there's a lot of people that are not in our tribe that begin to listen to a podcast like this and say, I've never thought about it this way.
Right. Now, I did want you to maybe give like a 5th grade level prescription to those that don't understand anything about the power that sunlight has over your health. So that, like in the earlier part of your story, you had said the carnivore diet people, the workout people did not realize how important it was. So can you kind of break that down a little bit? Maybe just start to say, look, basically you need to be outside for this many hours in the morning, in the evening.
They can't start like that, because that you just asked me to give you a centralized approach to decentralized medicine. And I will never do that for you. This is about as easy as I can make it.
All right, go ahead.
Think about 5,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians built a monument at the 28th latitude that looks to the east, all 4 extremities grounded. It's called the Sphinx. Why'd they do that? Why is their name of their god Ra named after the sun? Even the ancients knew there was something magical about the light from the sun. Every single ancient civilization, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Mayas, all of them, they knew the power of the sun. What the powers to be today in the Western world want you to believe, they want you to believe Bill Gates, dermatologists, and ophthalmologists are right that we should block the sun. You know why they believe that? Because it creates profits for them. That is absolutely a shitcoin opinion. So, what is the number one thing that Bitcoiners need to do so that you can begin to protect your stack? This is better than self-custody. It's actually better than cold storage. It's called seeing the sunrise every single day of your life from today forward. If this is the first time you've ever heard this advice, that's what you want to do. The second side of the coin is to make sure when the sun sets, wherever you live, make sure that it stays as dark as possible in your world. If you do those 2 things right, you will live a long, prosperous life with your family and your Bitcoin. And then you can start to talk to BTC sessions about self-custody and wallets and all that. But you need to get the story of sunrise and sunset absolutely correct to protect your health. It's that simple. Now, your next question is, well, how does all this work? That's when I got to split your head open and teach you a little bit of quantum physics. That's where my neurosurgery training comes in. I would tell you you're probably far better than trying to learn that on a podcast, signing up for Patreon. Go read my book on Amazon. Probably the easiest way is go look at my Twitter feed. My Twitter feed will blow your mind when you read some of it. If you really want to be stunned, put your disease and my name in a Google box and voila. You have to remember, I have 20 years of content, Greg, about this stuff. I didn't pull this shit out of my ass. Everything that I believe actually comes from a fundamental law of nature, which is based on physics, which is the foundation of all the sciences. So there's nothing that I will ever teach you that is Jack Kruse's opinion. It is the opinion of Mother Nature. My job is to show you how you fell off the trolley tracks, why you fell off the trolley tracks, and why you continue to believe Bill Gates, Fauci, Andreessen Horowitz, Jamie Dimon are correct about life. I am the anti-Mayo Clinic. I am the anti-Jamie Dimon. And I make no bones about it. I want to see those people destroyed. Okay? Not just harmed, destroyed. I come from the Buckminster Fuller way of looking at things, that we should not try to fix a broken paradigm. We should blow it up and start anew. That is true in medicine, and it's also true in money.
And so how is El Salvador adopting this as far as that law? Where is it now? Has it gotten passed, or
it's right now? Bukele just got re-inaugurated on June 1st. So right now it's in the legislative body. It should be done almost any day, this year. Obviously, I told you that legislatively, the law is a tough swallow for the people in the United States. So you can imagine what kind of swallow it is down here. But the difference in El Salvador opposed to the United States, in the last election that just got done, Bukele's party now has 95% of the Congress. So I want you to think, about our own electoral process. El Salvador and the United States are both constitutional republics. That means they reject democracy. Okay. It means the founding documents are really important. So when I told President Bukele the mistake that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams made with Benjamin Rush and medical freedoms, and we didn't put it in our Constitution, I reminded him this is the reason we got Anthony Fauci in 1982. The problem is Thomas Jefferson never realized that there would ever be an attack. You know how like in Bitcoin we talk about 51% attacks and how unrealistic they are? The same thing is true at our founding documents. The people who are the neocons, the liberals, look at our documents and said, what can we attack to water this down, to basically turn our Constitution into the UN doctrine, or their Constitution. And it turns out they have to slowly erode the things that are in the Constitution. Clearly with money, I don't have to convince anybody in Bitcoin how that's happening. We got Operation Choke Point 1.0 and 2.0. It started with Obama, and now it's been through the Biden administration. I would even say that Trump had a hand in that because he had Steve Mnuchin on as his Treasury Secretary. But the big effect is the medical freedom side. And the medical freedom side was used as a point of attack. And I would tell you, COVID, in my opinion, all the things that happen with the jab, is a compliance test for the coming economic reset. That is still ongoing. If you want to know what Lyle Brainerd and her switch between the Fed and the White House is now, is they are trying to get us to a CBDC. They know when they control our money, they control everything about us. And, if you go back and read the Federalist Papers about the arguments that went on between Madison, Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton, the reason why Aaron Burr, the vice president of Jefferson, shot and killed Hamilton is over this issue. The issue that we're having today in 2024, that banks are fundamentally a bad idea. Well, that's actually what we see Caitlin Long fighting with the Fed right now. We don't have any banks that support, the Bitcoin industry. And do we need that while we're running a parallel system to fiat? The answer is yes. Michael Saylor has brilliantly, I think, laid out why the maxis may be wrong. And remember, I am a former maxi. Michael doesn't believe that we should consider it a currency. We need to consider it a commodity, an asset like we do property, and then go that way. And you now see in Nashville, we had 10 senators, 2 presidential candidates basically say, we want to back our currency with Bitcoin. Well, I got to be honest with you. That's not the position probably of Satoshi. It's not the position of most maxis, but it's a pretty damn good, how shall we say, path to adoption. Remember we talked about my evolution in Bitcoin earlier? I would say this is the evolution of Bitcoin to full-scale adoption. We're actually living it, but we don't see it. And I think many times when Saylor has said some of the things that he said, the maxis have, tried to take him apart, because I know that people truly want to use this as a currency. Do I still believe in my maxi heart that it will become a currency somewhere down the road? I think it will be when governments realize they don't need to be afraid of it. It actually is a net benefit. I think El Salvador is leading the charge there because it is a currency here. This is the craziest thing for me, as a guy that's down here, when people tell me there's no use case. I mean, it's ridiculous. You can buy anything you want in El Salvador with Bitcoin. Now, it's difficult sometimes to get somebody to sell you their house for Bitcoin, but when you actually physically take them and show them that they could go to a Chivo machine and get their money out when they put their Bitcoin wallet on there, they're kind of like, shit, I didn't realize that. And then the real big change is when people realize that you don't need to have a bank intermediary. Like, we don't need to have a lawyer to do a transaction to buy a car or real estate like we do in the United States. Anybody who's bought a car from a dealership or a house from a realtor knows how many papers you have to sign. in El Salvador. The house that I'm living in now, which is one of the nicest houses in El Salvador, we didn't have to do any of that at all. So people tell me there's no use cases. You know what that tells me? They're idiot Americans that have never visited a place like El Salvador to see truly what an open economy looks like, a Bitcoin economy. No, it's not just a Bitcoin beach, but I can go right now to Super Selectos and buy my groceries with Bitcoin. I can go right now and buy gas with Bitcoin. I can go right now and get my car washed for Bitcoin. In fact, there's guys right back over there. I'll show you the wall. It's my Bukele Freedom Wall right there. They're behind that wall, and they are building me a teak deck so that I can see the sunrise and sunset every day with Bitcoin. So don't tell me there's not a use case. And I will tell you, the guy who's building the deck, he's never done a Bitcoin transaction. And I explained to him how to do it so that I don't get cropped with taxes. He doesn't get cropped with taxes. And he was stunned. And when he saw how fast the transfer, he goes, so I don't have to wait for this money to clear. I said, no, bro, go buy your wood. Go get all your stuff. Go hire your guys. I said, not only that, I made them all download, wallets. I made them all download Strike. And I paid them, via Strike right here. And they all looked at me like, this is freaking amazing. I got my money right away.
Yeah. Now, do you foresee the El Salvadorian population being similar to maybe Singapore, how they capitalized on?
No, I think they're better off. You know why? The government here is all the things that people in Singapore have benefit of. So does El Salvador. They don't have to pay taxes on their Bitcoin here either. But you know what the bigger benefit is here? Bitcoin is legal tender here. Singapore doesn't have that. So this is the center of the Bitcoin universe. Let me just tell you something. And this is going to piss off your audience. You're not a true fucking maxi until you get your ass here and see what it's all about. Like, it's really interesting that guys can sit on Clubhouse, they can sit on Twitter and talk shit about El Salvador, kind of like Trump did, in his Michigan speech about Bukele. I got news for you. Bukele is the GOAT of presidents. He has done things for his people that Trump didn't do in his first 4 years, that Bobby wants to do for us in his coming presidency. Bitcoiners have to decide, do they want to vote for a guy who had 4 years, who had Steve Mnuchin, did Operation Warp Speed, was centralized and fuck, and now he just needs our 50 million votes to get in? Look, I'm not telling Craig people who to vote for. I'm just pointing out the obvious, okay?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what Jack Dorsey did to me in the beginning. He goes, bro, this is Bitcoin. This is money. Here's the pros and cons. You decide. See, that to me is the mark of a great teacher, when they show you what the pros and cons are, but they don't tell you what to think. I was hoping that Bitcoin Nashville would open up some of the maxis ideas who think that Trump is the ideal candidate. Like David Bailey, who runs the conference, he firmly is behind Trump. I get it. Several of the guys that are in Clubhouse that are OG Bitcoiners, I get it. But I'm the guy that always points out that was fucking Mr. Operation Warp Speed. He was in Moderna and Pfizer's pocket, bro. Steve Mnuchin was his treasury secretary, who said Bitcoin was fucking terrible. Well, I got news for you. I don't forget. I'm always willing to let you know I believe that you can adapt. I'm giving Trump the benefit of the doubt right now that he is adapting. But do I think that Bobby has adapted much more rapidly and he has way more money in Bitcoin than Trump does? Yeah, I mean, dude, all you have to do is go out and see what he got from the Monsanto settlement. Millions of dollars he bought Bitcoin with. So Bobby is all in, as far as I'm concerned. And when he came to Nashville, he told people, look, everybody knows the Kennedy family is wealthy. Bobby has more money now in Bitcoin. He's more wealthy from that aspect. To me, that makes us more, he's more part of our tribe than anybody else. And I think that when you have your money in Bitcoin, it becomes very easy for you to become decentralized in other parts of your life. So, for example, some of the things, Craig, that I've heard on Twitter just the last 2 weeks since Nashville is that, oh, well, What about his stance on abortion? What about his stance on the Second Amendment? And I said to people very clearly, I said, bro, the way the court is stacked, the way the United States is, do you think any of those two things are real issues? They're not. They're never going to get overturned. So why would that be an issue for who you vote for? Ultimately, the only thing that really matters is fix our money, fix all the other problems, and let's fix healthcare so that we can never have another repeat of Fauci, the NIH, and all the other idiots that are running, centralized healthcare in the United States. I mean, we spend more money on healthcare and we have the worst health in the world. That should tell Bitcoiners, what the fuck are we doing? And remember, you're not going to be a millennial forever. Eventually, you're going to become an old fucker like me, and you're going to need a doctor to tell you the truth. Do you think these doctors they're trying to give kids puberty blockers and cut their breasts off and turn them into girls? That's actually what the AMA supports. Okay? That's the problem. That's the reason why what I think both Trump and Bobby are trying to get through to people is we got to cut our dependence on the big Cantillon effect that big pharma has. They're the number one devastator as far as I'm concerned. Like, people think it's the banks. Like Caitlin Long, I think, thinks it's the banks and the Fed. I don't. I think it's big pharma. And the reason why, they are fueling all of this stuff by paying for the ads on TV. All the ads are paid for by big pharma. They're the ones that are picking and choosing the people in the uniparty to run against us. Many of the people in Trump's own party are basically fans of Kamala. And you need to realize that both of these people hate us. Both parties hate us. If you're a Bitcoiner, you have no friends in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you that King George in 1774 was more a friend to us than anybody in the uniparty today. And I don't give a fuck if you don't agree with it. It's the truth. Because guess what? Don't listen to what they say. Listen to how they're treating us. Right. They give two fucks about us. So guess what? What did Thomas Jefferson say in the Federalist Papers? When a government puts unjust laws on you, it's your duty as a patriot not to follow them. And, people don't realize this is codified in Supreme Court doctrine. There's a case from 1803 that actually reiterates what was in the Federalist Papers. But you know what? Nobody in today's world in DC wants you to know that that precedent is there. So guess what? You may get your job taken away like you did in COVID. But now, 4 years later, the Supreme Court has finally caught up and they're making those people pay for the decisions they made. Well, guess what? We need to make every single corporation that took your job away, took your rights away, pay in fiat. And then hopefully you're not a dumbass that keeps the money in fiat in Jamie Dimon's bank, that you put it into Bitcoin. Not an ETF, Bitcoin. An ETF is not Bitcoin. Okay? It's not. That is the tribe that I look to build. That is the people that I'm speaking to. I don't speak to your whole audience. I guarantee you there's a lot of your audience I've already pissed off. Good, because you're not my target. My target is the people that are the decentralized thinkers that know that you've been lied to and you're no longer going to support anybody who's lied to you in the past. We need people that are going to tell you the truth about everything, even if the truth kicks you square in the balls.
Now, can you describe the environment over there as far as the citizens that are moving there to El Salvador for the reasons that you're describing? How is that going? Is it still a tiny part? Do you really see an upwelling?
No, it's huge. And I'll tell you the reason why. You know that El Salvador is a pretty small country. It's about the size of Connecticut or South Carolina. It's got a small population, only 5 million people. So that means you can move the needle quite a bit with tourism. If you look at from 2020 to 2024, El Salvador's economic boom is like everybody else, money's failing. And remember, we still use American money here. You come down to El Salvador, you see building everywhere. It's the most crazy thing you've ever seen. The country's being retooled, brand new roads, new library. I mean, all you have to do is go follow, Bukele's Instagram or his Twitter to see all the different things that are going on here. What is fueling that? The tourism that's happening here. Why? Because Bitcoin OGs are coming here. What is probably the number one group of people that I see here? It's Canadians, Australians, and Europeans that are loaded with Bitcoin who are just fed up with the tyranny in their own groups. United States people aren't the number one group of people here. And the reason why is we have been able to weather the storm better because I think we're the global reserve currency. We also are not facing some of the things that Europe is facing. We're certainly not facing what's going on in Canada, and we're not facing, what's going on in Australia. Those people have made big switches. They're like, look, I cannot tolerate this. Like, I'll give you a story. I'm not going to tell you his name, but when I was in Bitcoin Nashville, a Canadian former NHL player contacted me. He's one of my members, and he told me about his concerns. I did a consult with him and his family. And I said to him, I said, why don't you just come down here, stay in my house while I'm in Nashville? And he looked at me, he goes, you serious? I said, yeah. I said, my guys will come pick you up at the airport. Your family can come here, and you can see if I'm lying to you, if this isn't not where freedom is. So they did that. I got a beautiful message, from his wife and his son, who wants to follow in his dad's footprints. And he's like, bro, I think we're definitely coming here. And the reason why is because of the Trudeau's policies. What happened with the truckers? Canadians, no one wants to pick up and leave their country. But Craig, I'm going to remind you of something. Even though your name is LeBlanc, remember, where the United States came from is from disaffected misfits from the UK. Where your people came from, the original, I would say, Cajuns, they also were disaffected people from France, that
Nova Scotia.
Correct. That wound up coming down to Lafayette, Louisiana in the Louisiana Purchase. Most people don't know this story, but what I guess I'm trying to say to you, I don't think it's un-American to own a piece of property and let's say a footprint down here. Doesn't mean that you're going to live here forever and ever and ever, but I look at El Salvador the same way you would probably look at having a beach house in Destin. That if the shit truly does hit the fan, it'd be a really nice place to go. And I think that's what the people in the UK did in 1770 and 1774. They were like, the king is a jackass. Maybe it'd be a good idea to get on some of these boats and go over there and see what's going on. And I think that experiment for the United States of America has turned out to be pretty good. So when I hear idiots on Clubhouse or Twitter tell me that I was an asshole for moving here, I would say, no, you're making the same mistake that the Brits are making now, and take a look what they're dealing with in their country right now. I don't think that's something that I want to see in the streets, of New Orleans, the streets of Miami, Florida, the streets of Chicago, New York. But guess what? Aren't we seeing that in some of the cities that are controlled by the people in Kamala and Biden's party? The answer is we've been seeing it for almost 8 years. How much more does the current events do you have to continue to lie to yourself? I just think that Americans have become so apathetic because we've had it good for so long that we don't think that the government can fail. And I mean, everything in my bone and my body has told me for 10 years, the government's failing because money's failing. And the government is going to have to make a huge decision. I think we all know that initial decision through the BIS was the CBDC. But guess what? Trump kind of foiled that. I got to give Trump some credit. When he put the Supreme Court together the way he did, it's going to make getting a CBDC through because of the Fourth Amendment a really difficult issue. And it's going to take some more work by the Uniparty, to erode the U.S. Constitution until we get to the level of like where Venezuela is now. And, current events, I think all of us saw, what's going on with Maduro's election and how that all worked. It's a real interesting conundrum, but I think a lot of people don't believe that it can happen here in the United States. I think it can. If you have another, like if Kamala wins and we get, say, 8 or 12 more years of DNC control or uniparty control, it would not surprise me if my kids live in a place like Venezuela. Why? Because the founding documents are no longer worthwhile, and democracy reigns. Democracy is for idiots. That's when the imbeciles, basically it's mob rule. And this is the reason why every single great government before us warned us that democracy is not a problem. If you listen to DNC rhetoric, that's why they always use the word democracy versus constitutional republic. And it's part of the reason I brought you the story of what President Bukele asked me to do. He said, Jack, we need to write a constitutional amendment. Why? Because Bukele's not going to be the president forever. In other words, when you change the Constitution, it means the future becomes very difficult for future governments. And I shouldn't have to remind Americans of this fact. The Constitution is the rules the government has to play by. Don't forget that. They want to force and tell us what to do. That's not how the government was originally started. But that's how the people in power in Washington, D.C. want to change the narrative through propaganda. And remember, Obama is the DNC guy that changed the rule for propaganda. That just happened recently, where you now can use propaganda against your own citizens. That used to be illegal prior to 2008. And you are seeing it the last 12 years, dude. I cannot believe the propaganda that's being used by our intelligence agencies against us. Just look at the Trump assassination.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, it's bad. So where can my audience find out more about your work, especially, on the sun exposure and all the stuff going on in El Salvador? Is it mainly just through your Twitter feed, or?
No, I have a website, jackkruse.com, and it has forums associated with it. It'd take you probably 10 years to get through everything.
Yeah.
But I would tell you, go there because that's free first. And then I would say use a Google search. That'd be second. Then I think when you follow my Twitter feed, I think you'll realize I'm the real deal. Everything that I give you has scientific basis. And then when you want more of me, which I would call is DIY Jack Kruse, you join my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Dr. Jack Kruse. You want to follow me on any platform, it's always Dr. Jack Kruse. I have a lot of imposters, so just realize it's always Dr. Jack Kruse.
That's a good sign when you have imposters.
Yeah, and I got a book on Amazon, and probably the big thing is I have a tribe membership. When you decide you want more of my time, you want to hear more of my opinions on different things, you become a silver, gold, or platinum member, and then you get to spend a lot more time and get to ask me questions directly related to your medical problems. I'll be more than happy to answer them at that time.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate your time, and I'd love to maybe even have you back with a panel. Maybe Dr. Amoose would be willing to do that as well, because I think I'm starting to see a growing number of professionals questioning their own system that taught them, and I think that's what we need, because one thing he told me that doctors are really rule followers. They don't really go against the system much. So you're definitely a rare breed that we need to get more airtime for. So I appreciate the work that you're doing.
No problem. I think it's important for us to always question everything.
Yeah, 100% agree. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to do my best to go to El Salvador. I've got two hosts that I work with, Joel and Diana, that were educators. And they invited me to something coming up, I think, in November.
Yeah, there's a Bitcoin meeting down here in November.
Yeah, that's the one I'm going to try to make. So hopefully, are you going to do that one as well?
Well, I have my annual members meeting at that time. So I don't know if I'll be at that event. I'll probably be hosting my own down here in El Salvador for, my tribe members have been with me for a long time.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll stay there about a month and just try to really get the lay of the land to see what I can do.
Sounds good. Well, we look forward to seeing you down here.
Fantastic. Appreciate your time, Dr. Jack. Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
All right. That was Dr. Jack Kruse, really fantastic neurosurgeon that has been doing a lot of good work for quite some time, really an expert in the industry. You can find more of his content on X, and from there it will lead you down a bunch of rabbit holes. You can join his tribe. But one of the great Bitcoiners that actually started outside of Bitcoin came in and really started to highlight Bitcoin to the people he was already working with, which I really love when that happens, that people study it, come in the right way, and then stand up to give that unpopular opinion. And that's definitely something he's been doing probably since he was a little boy. So we need more of those people that have an independent mind, independent thought, and are able to question the narrative, even if it's their own narrative. So I love that about the Bitcoiners. Really, I think that's a good part of the human race, that we can think we know something and we hold on to it for many years, but then we come across some new information and we're able to question our own beliefs. I think that's a sign of an intelligent person, that you can actually disprove something you've believed for quite a while. And I think we need to open our minds up to be more free thinkers like that. And that's how we kind of move forward as a civilization. So thank you so much, Dr. Jack, for coming on. Again, this is Craig LeBlanc, the founder of LTP TV, which stands for Low Time Preference TV. And I'll close with this. I don't know if y'all caught this. If not, go back and listen to it. But one thing Dr. Kruse talked about and highlighted is how there is a lot of time theft going on. And so it's not just about stealing your money, it's about stealing your time. And then what time you have, it's about controlling your time. And so for those holding Bitcoin or any assets at all, remember, the most important thing you have, the most valuable thing you have, is time. And you should protect that at all costs. And if you have to make a decision between time and money, go with the time, because your time is valuable. To spend with your loved ones, to spend on thinking, to spend on relaxing. If you have the ability to take a year off and really maybe reinvent yourself, question how you're living, health-wise, how you generate wealth, the people you're surrounding yourselves by, take the time and invest it there. Make sure you're not just working for that paycheck and that's all you're getting out of the time that you're giving to your employers, or how you generate wealth. So appreciate y'all listening, and we will have many more guest speakers like Dr. Jack, and we'll keep the great content coming. So appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Let's go stack some sats, and y'all have an awesome weekend. Thanks.